In 2017, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine NAS published a report and strategy that it developed for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency (EPA) to evaluate the evidence that chemicals are capable of causing health effects at low doses. For this exercise, the NAS committee chose to define low dose as external or internal exposure that falls within the range estimated to occur in humans, and only lightly touched on the separate but related topic of non-monotonic dose response curves (NMDRs). Low dose effects and NMDRs are often confused as they are frequently discussed together, e.g. in reference to the non-monotonic low-dose hypothesis, the idea that the slope of the dose-response curve for some chemicals changes direction at low doses. Before we can really dig into the NAS report on low dose effects, first, it's important to elaborate on this distinction. I will then explain how the NAS Low Dose Committee report offers modest, but sound, guidance to the EPA regarding the use of systematic review and evidence integration to assist in the agency's hazard assessments and to evaluate the potential for chemicals to cause low-dose effects. Monotonic versus non-monotonic dose-response curves. A conventional assumption of toxicology is that the dose-response relationship between a chemical and an adverse health effect will have a monotonic shape, that is, the slope of the curve does not change sign. On the other hand, non-monotonic dose-response curves change sign at one or more inflection points. In the case of chemicals that are purported to exhibit a U-shaped curve, effects are suspected to be more prominent at low and high doses than they are at intermediate doses. Some scientists have expressed a concern that evidence for such curves could be missed if the doses tested are not low enough, or if not enough doses are tested to reveal such a shape. Although this non-monotonic, low-dose hypothesis is often discussed in relation to endocrine-related science, scientists at regulatory agencies across the globe, including the EPA and European Food Safety Authority (EFSA), have argued that the hypothesis could, in theory, apply to all chemicals, regardless of the mechanism by which they cause toxicity. Some of those same regulatory agencies also have conducted rigorous reviews and have been unable to validate the non-monotonic, low-dose hypothesis using reproducible, relevant testing. For example, in 2013, EPA issued a draft report, stated the science evaluation non-monotonic dose responses as they apply to estrogen, androgen, and thyroid pathways and EPA testing and assessment procedures, to evaluate the evidence on NMDR curves and to make judgments about EPA's toxicity testing practices and the implications for its risk assessment procedures. The draft concluded that exposure to endocrine active chemicals (EACs) can result in NMDR curves for specific endpoints, and that such curves were found more often in vitro studies, at high doses, and for exposures of short duration. It also asserted that there was insufficient evidence that NMDR curves for adverse effects occur below thresholds derived from traditional toxicity testing. This lack of evidence is not surprising, however, since the non-monotonic, low-dose hypothesis runs contrary to the well-established principle of dose-response relationships. In other words, the dose makes the poison. Dose differentiates a poison from a remedy. This principle is the cornerstone of drug development in modern pharmacology as well as safety assessment in modern toxicology. Request to evaluate evidence of low-dose adverse effects via endocrine-mediated pathway. At the request of the EPA, the NAS convened an ad hoc committee of experts to make recommendations for a strategy to evaluate evidence of low-dose adverse. Conduct a risk assessment using the outcome of the case studies, and so their work was limited to assessing hazard potential only. Concluding thoughts. In conclusion, the NAS Low Dose Committee report makes some modest, but sound, recommendations to the EPA about an overall strategy for evaluating the potential for chemicals, including those that are endocrine active EACs, to cause low-dose effects. More specifically, the committee outlines how the EPA can use systematic review and evidence integration methods to assist in its hazard assessments. As I have pointed out in this blog and in an earlier blog, systematic review has some obvious advantages in terms of improving transparency and objectivity in assessing the totality of relevant evidence applied to resolving environmental health questions. However, it remains a highly subjective process, and further experience and discussion are needed to improve the methodology.